Has your bass section ever been accused of dragging?
Hey! Hey, contrabassi, follow me!
What's going on? It's Jason Heath. As I frequently do for these videos, I put the topic out on social media. A lot of comments came in, and I ended up connecting with 4 bass players from across the globe to talk about their experiences about this topic.
Contrabassi, obviously!
Here's Thomas Fiorini from the Brussels Philharmonic to kick off this discussion.
Well, it's so funny when you put that out on social media, and there was a lot of people with a lot of opinions, and let me first say I agree with all of them. They're all right. Yes. You know, and I like the ones who are getting more detailed about science and this and that, and distance and all of that. It's all correct. But the bottom line is it's true. We often play late.
You have no ears, no eyes! You!
Where to place the beat and are the basses dragging? These are hot topics in orchestras across the globe. In fact, it came up in a conversation with Berlin Philharmonic members in 2020. Here's Berlin Phil horn player Sarah Willis on how the bass section leads in that ensemble.
Claudio's a fantastic musician. He wasn't always the clearest conductor. I had no idea where to play. And Klaus Wallendorf leaned over, he said, "Don't play before the basses." And that is really the rule of our orchestra.
Berlin Philharmonic principal bassist Matthew McDonald elaborates, reinforcing what Tom Fiorini is describing.
I mean, it's always going to be an issue of dragging as a bass player. It just takes time for our sound to project. And often by the time it gets to someone's ear, it sounds late. But what's nice in this orchestra is that everyone's aware of that phenomenon and kind of waits for our sound, which makes us feel not only loved, but also we have a chance of making it sound together then. Because if we try and play as immediately as a violin, I mean, basically they look at the string and it speaks. We can't compete with that without starting to become very, kind of aggressive.
There can be a culture in a bass section of playing extremely together. And if you are lucky enough to be part of a bass section with that culture, that it won't quite matter as much if you're a millisecond ahead, a millisecond behind, that the section is so together and it sounds like one giant organism that nobody will pick their heads up and say it's to this or to that. And we'll kind of impose our will on the rest of the orchestra to come with us.
How much did the physics of the bass sound contribute to the perception that bass players are dragging? The bass player's low E string travels at a 40 hertz cycle. This means that only 40 wavelengths pass through the conductor's ear in 1 second, or just 10 in a quarter of a second. In that same moment, 20 cycles of the cello E, an octave higher, would have passed through the conductor's ear from a closer distance, and a C natural from the violins at 2000 hertz would have registered 500 iterations in that same quarter second from an even closer distance. But, and this adds another level of complexity to the problem, the bass doesn't just produce that fundamental pitch. There's much more going on in the sound. The attack can be quite percussive and add a whole different amount of frequencies to the sound. For example, here's one way I could play a note. Here's another way I could play a note. Here's another way. Here's another way. You can see that depending on how I'm articulating, there's much more sonic information than just the fundamental going out into the hall. We bassists have been thinking through this for generations, and we're always trying to find the right balance of fitting in, leading, watching, and listening. I spoke with Aaron Olguin, who is principal bassist of the Trondheim Symphony in Norway, about how his bass section is working to propel the ensemble.
We're really on top of it. Like, we really want to be on top, and we help really drive as much as possible. Especially with time, we really do, I think, focus together on our timing. What are we listening to? What instrument are we listening to? Who are we looking at whenever we get to these tricky spots where we have to be together?
It's incredible what you can learn from simply going out into the hall to listen to how your bass section fits in with the rest of the group.
Whenever a section member is rotated out, they go and listen to the rehearsals and they talk about what they're hearing. And almost every single time, whenever they go to listen, and every time I've gone out, and listen to concerts, for example, or rehearsals, the basses are just always late.
Shame on you!
Okay, so now the big question, why are we always late?
I think it's because it has this blossoming effect. The sound has a sonic blossom. So it's not only blossoming as an instrument, it like fills up the cavity, the sound fills up the cavity of the instrument, and then it gets released out. So it's a lot of air it has to fill up, right? And then on top of that, it has to move through all the bodies. It has to move through all of the instruments in front of you. And so it just takes a second. It's just every time.
John van Lierop, principal bassist for Sinfonia Rotterdam and frequent guest principal in many European orchestras, describes this phenomenon quite eloquently.
The bass sound is different than the attack which the cellos and the violins and the violas have. So, and I think that's one of the things that people need to be aware of, is that our sound, we are actually in a way working with an illusion. Because when we think we play like pa, and the whole sounds wah.
Right.
Yeah, that's our bass note develops after about 6 meters, but also it develops very, depending on the acoustics of the whole, outwards. And that is when the conductor says basses are too loud. While we're not too loud, we're just making a big cloud, we're making a big noise. So I think we have to realize that when you play in an orchestra, whether you play early music or whether you play symphony orchestra, I don't think there's that much difference. I think the aspect of playing, the most important aspect is the attack.
How the bass section articulates can play a major factor in being perceived as on time or late.
When you play with a big section, you play in generally the notes half as short as the cellos do. In the whole, they sound like the same length. And you always play with an attack, which means with slightly accents, depending of course on the music, how it is. But in many ways, many bow changes aren't registered. They are registered on the cello, but not on the bass. So on the bass, sometimes you need to make this really small attack so it's noticeable.
Another big issue for bass sections is the conductor and their perception of when, where, why, and how the basses should be lining up.
The first bass. You are always late. You have no ears, no eyes. Nothing at all.
Cory Palmer, principal bassist of the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra, shares some thoughts on this with me.
I think a lot of it comes down to how a conductor perceives it. So it's what the conductor thinks of it, then how they approach fixing it, and then what's actually happening to make that seem that way. One thing with that kind of bugs me when conductors approach this kind of thing, whether it's any sectional orchestra, like rushing, dragging, you're late, you're out of tune, all that, is kind of framing things in a right or wrong sense. And one thing that just irritates people is like nobody likes being told that they're wrong. So that starts problems right there. But it's also that they're not necessarily wrong, because if you're talking about rushing, the people they could just be feeling it moving forward, rather than the conductor just wants it really stable. Like with the the bass section appearing to be behind the beat, it's just we could be listening to the melody rather than an accompanimental figure. That can be problematic in Rochester, just because if the violas say have an accompanimental figure, that's they're pretty stable, and then the violins have some really gorgeous lyric material. Here they tend to take a little extra time, not necessarily follow the conductor strictly, and if you're going with them, you're going to be pretty far behind the violas. All it really takes is for the conductor saying who's leading a section. If we're supposed to be going with the violins, that helps us know who we're supposed to be listening to. That, but that also tells the violins that they shouldn't lose us. Like make sure that we are with them, so it's like connect with those.
You are a very good bass, but Italian opera, you are terrible.
It could be one or two bass players. If any bass player is a little bit late, that's where the beat's perceived.
I saw your bow. Always after, always late.
Where you're sitting in the bass section can be a major factor in your perception of where the beat should be.
We're usually right next to the brass section. I'm in the front of the section, right towards the edge of the stage, right behind the cellos. I can hear the string players pretty well. So a lot of times I'll go with the string section, and then the guys in the back of the section are right next to the tuba and the bass trombone. So like that's all they can hear. So they're just going with those guys. And so if they don't know that they should be going with the strings, or vice versa, we should be going with the brass. You can have sections doing two totally different things.
Finally, there are some tricks of the trade that you learn along the way that'll help you understand how to fit into a bass section, how to lead the orchestra in a helpful way.
If you play beat, bang, it's there. That's the same should be with the arco. Fond of playing with sticky rosin and lots of rosin. Worry very often, sticky rosin, then I can't make this, and when there's a piano passage, in the orchestra, you don't have to worry about piano, you have to worry about playing forte.
The art of orchestra playing is really all senses and then some. So we are using our ears, we are feeling a kind of subdivision that should be going on through the music, that should be first coming from the conductor and then sort of somehow with body language conveyed through the principal players. I think what I don't see enough of in some of the younger players, Francois Rabat says it, right? If the movement is wrong, the sound is wrong. Try to imitate the movement of the principal player, whether it's with the pizzicatos or the down bows or your entrances. You'll have much more of a chance if you're all kind of dancing the same way.
What we have found to work the best is to go by what we see, and not necessarily the conductor. But if we want to play together, then we have to go with the instrument of the highest sonority.
This is a huge topic for sure. Hopefully this video has gone at least a little way in demystifying this for you. If you'd like a follow-up video on this topic, and we could do so many videos on this topic, or have any suggestions for future topics, leave a comment below. You can check out the description below for all my research on this video. Thank you to everybody who spoke with me, who left a comment. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. And if you like this kind of deep dive, check out this next video we've got linked up in our Stupid Bass History series.
The first bass. You are always late. You have no ears, no eyes, nothing at all.